By the end of the 80s, cyberpunk had stepped out from the shadows. While the genre debuted with cult classic movies seen by few, pen and paper games played in basements, and edgy novels whispered about in book clubs, it had eventually taken the world by storm, due in no small part to the explosion of personal computing. Just like those pages that described a world where computers would consume our day-to-day lives, reality began to resemble science fiction, and it took the prophetic genre of cyberpunk along for the ride. Before the 90s rolled around, only hyper-enthusiasts, schools, and businesses used computers. But as the turn of the millennium approached, Microsoft and Apple battled over desktops worldwide with the emergence of their consumer-oriented operating systems, far surpassing the capability and accessibility of anything previously available. Soon, these two humble companies conquered massive amounts of the PC market share, mirroring the megacorps common in cyberpunk literature. This fresh wave of interest in cyberspace and electronics helped drive the mystique and possibility of cyberpunk, and mainstream movie and television studios took notice. Cyberpunk, as envisioned by classic authors like Dick, Gibson, and Williams, had taken a backseat to these more accessible, visual mediums. This unconquered frontier would help seal the genre into the psyche of a more mainstream audience, making one thing abundantly clear: cyberpunk was here to stay. What was once too distant from the public consciousness was becoming much more digestible as reality reflected science fiction more each year. Technology we'd only dreamed about in science fiction, such as virtual reality, was actually happening, albeit in a crude fashion. Screenwriters, game developers, and novelists jumped at the chance to explore high-tech worlds with a dark and broody edge. A slew of blockbuster movies, hit video games, and thought-provoking TV series connected with millions across both the Western and Eastern worlds. Born in obscurity, now thrust into the spotlight, this is the story of how cyberpunk went viral. Wars, their terrible effects, and their long-standing repercussions have often been the linchpin of the themes found in contemporary fiction. The 1990s were a decade filled with conflict, revolution, and turmoil, but it also saw us step out of a darker era into a more hopeful one. As the century came to a close, we saw the end of the 4 decades of proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, propaganda campaigns, and generations tarnished by terror in the conflict known as the Cold War. By the war's end, the Soviet Union was a shadow of its former glory, and its leaders began to dismantle what was left of this massive collective, spanning over 8 million square miles across 11 time zones. This brought a brighter vision of the future than this fallen empire had ever hoped to see. With Mother Russia sidestepping as the boogeyman of the Western world, the decade would be peppered with more localized conflicts, from the deadly skirmishes of the Gulf War in the Middle East, to the dissolution of Yugoslavia, to the bloody conflicts of Rwanda and Somalia. These power plays would drastically shift our interpretation of how the grand theater of the world would play out, and colored the cyberpunk fiction of the time. Starting 1990 off with a bang, Hollywood took another stab at adapting the fiction of Philip K. Dick. RoboCop director Paul Verhoeven helmed the project, alongside writer Dan O'Bannon, known for his work on The Long Tomorrow and Ridley Scott's Alien. Total Recall is a sci-fi action thriller loosely based on the 1966 PKD short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. The original short story is a high-concept thought experiment written during the height of Soviet espionage. It's a simple story about artificial memories, brainwashing, and the effects that they have on your personality. While it hints at a larger universe than explored in its pages, it never even leaves Earth's atmosphere.
He awoke and wanted Mars. The valleys, he thought. What would it be like to trudge among them? Great and greater yet, the dream grew as he became fully conscious. The dream and the yearning.
The film was pumped full of adrenaline, reinterpreted as an action-packed Arnold Schwarzenegger bonanza. The plot revolves around one Douglas Quaid, a construction worker who yearns for something more and has a strange obsession with going to the off-world colonies on Mars, despite never having left Earth. It's all Quaid ever talks about, even though Mars is the war-torn scab of the solar system. The red planet's natural atmosphere is an unlivable hellscape, and the only thing between the colonists and a horrific death are glass domes built by private mining corporations. Mars is under constant conflict between the rebels fighting for freedom and oxygen and the Mars security forces, overseen by the tyrannical Chancellor Cohagen, who extorts the common people with ever-inflating prices of breathable air. Ignoring the stern advice of his wife and friends, and frustrated at his inability to visit the Red Planet, Quaid does the next best thing and visits Recall, a memory implant service with a checkered reputation. There, he can order a tailor-made memory that feels as lifelike and inspiring as the real thing, without ever leaving their offices. He customizes his trip to be a Martian adventure to uncover a clandestine plot, casting him as a secret agent with a spirited love interest. Things take a turn for the worse when the everyday Quaid has a psychotic break during the memory implant procedure. He wails about how he's actually a real secret agent and that his cover is blown. Deadly assassins hunt him down, and friends and family he once trusted all seem to be in on the conspiracy, eerily similar to the vacation he custom-ordered back at the memory clinic.
We can't let him run around, he knows too much.
Laurie says he can't remember jack shit.
That's now. In an hour he could have total recall.
Quaid embarks to Mars with the burning desire to find out who he really is, all the while evading his pursuers, who will stop at nothing to prevent him from learning the secret. Total Recall subtly toys with your expectations throughout its runtime. It repeatedly makes you question whether this larger-than-life Martian espionage is actually happening to Quaid, or if his brain is frying back at Recall, stuck in a fantasy prison of his own design. At one point, a Recall rep even offers Quaid a red pill as a token of his willingness to wake up from his supposed dream, a symbol later popularized by The Matrix as a synonym for awakening.
Okay then, if I'm not me, who the hell am I?
Underneath its Hollywood shell, Total Recall is cyberpunk at its core. High-tech memory implants, corporate mercenaries, and a low-life mutant populace crushed under the heel of a greedy and dangerous authority. Unlike Blade Runner's box office disappointment, this second attempt at adapting PKD's work managed to wow audiences and critics alike, and made its money back fivefold. It was a huge hit, and further proved that cyberpunk films could not only be inspired, but also raise the bottom line.
This, to me, is the ultimately heroic trait of ordinary people. They say no to the tyrant, and they calmly take the consequences of this resistance.
Cut from the same cloth as Total Recall, another PKD novelette was later adapted, the 1953 Cold War-era work, Second Variety. The 1995 film adaptation was also penned by Dan O'Bannon and starred RoboCop veteran Peter Weller. Screamers is mostly faithful to the source material, but updates the context from a lunar war with the Soviet Union to futuristic, fictional factions battling on an off-world mining colony. After receiving a truce offering by their longtime enemy, a rugged band of soldiers make their way to a distant base to discuss terms of peace. They quickly realize they've fallen into a trap, set not by enemy forces, but by the titular Screamers, man-made killing machines that cut through the ground like land-born sharks and eviscerate anything with a pulse. Unbeknownst to the Alliance, these relics of war evolved to self-replicate and can now bypass the safety protocols that prevented them from attacking their makers. The Squad finds plans that vaguely describe specialized models of Screamers that mimic the human form, with one more advanced version with unknown potential. With the horrifying discovery that these mimics could already be amongst their teammates, paranoia infects the crew's hopeless mission for survival. These wary soldiers constantly challenge each other's humanity, a recurring theme in PKD's work. Unfortunately, the movie's premise is easily compared to John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982, which had a more airtight plot and more charismatic characters. The Screamers have some identifiable quirks, such as repeating key phrases while under pressure, perhaps an imperfect simulation of social discourse. This leads to some genuinely unsettling moments.
It's a type 2.
Going, genius. You know how to count to 3.
Just get off my back.
What are they supposed to look like?
Oh, you mean who are they supposed to look like?
Look in the mirror, Ross. You keep saying the same thing over and over. Because you can't find anything smarter to say.
Just get off my...
Exactly.
Despite its efforts, the film fumbles the exploration of its themes, becoming more of a guilty pleasure rather than a timeless Frankensteinian fable. It does, however, shed a profound light on sentience and its inevitability toward conflict. The protagonist eventually comes to the realization that the Screamers are already developing hostilities between factions of their own species, mimicking the failings of their human creators. Inspired by Blade Runner's mesmerizing style, and motivated by RoboCop and Total Recall's financial success, a surge of cyberpunk-styled movies were unleashed onto the public. Many released exclusively to VHS home video, or made up most of their profits through rentals, rather than the risk and expense of a theatrical debut. This cheaper alternative made these B films possible and profitable. The best of these are guilty pleasures, with fast-paced action shootouts, moody atmosphere, and unsettling practical effects. But due to their limited budgets and the direction and writing quality common in direct-to-video work, these were the exception, not the rule. These films had interesting premises, like saving a scorched Los Angeles on the brink of collapse from a cyborg assimilation, a desperate escape from a high-tech prison with cybernetically enhanced security, to a neo-noir detective story about hunting a DNA-stealing serial killer in the flooded streets of future London. Their creators attempted to delve into the themes of the loftier films that inspired them, but their reach exceeded their grasp. This marked an interesting trend in cyberpunk media during the earlier parts of the decade. It started out with a focus on high-tech but physical technology, robotics, cyborgs, and cybernetic hardware, only to later pivot towards software and virtual reality. An early example of this trend was, appropriately named, Hardware, a sleazy, cult classic slasher flick. Soaked in cyberpunk style, it later came under fire for being too derivative of one of the stories told in the 2000 AD comic series. It's a fever dream of red neon lights, sweat, degeneracy, and violence. The story revolves around a couple who come into the possession of a scrapped robot head. But to their horror, the robot suddenly turns on and reverts to its military programming. Like Terminator's twisted, filthy cousin, this mechanical monster starts painting the walls of their city block red in a vicious killing spree. With an underlying critique of authoritarianism and the evils of just following orders, writer-director Richard Stanley took inspiration from the horrors of apartheid in his homeland of South Africa. Hardware is a crude but enjoyable small-scale story. There's no looming apocalypse or civilization-destroying threat, just a slice of life in a shady mirror image of our own reality. Speaking of the Terminator, 7 years after the original movie exploded into cinemas, James Cameron brought Terminator 2: Judgment Day to the silver screen to roaring applause.
Get down.
The sequel pivots from the slasher horror of the original into more action sci-fi fare, but doesn't ignore its darker roots. Many clever twists and turns make what easily could have been a by-the-numbers follow-up into something exciting and fresh. Now featuring 2 Terminators pitted against one another, the main objective this time around is to save an adolescent John Connor from a horrific fate, and to prepare him for his predestined role as leader against the machine uprising. The new villain of the film is the T-1000, a cunning, upgraded model of Terminator who can feign empathy to manipulate people and morph its liquid metal body into sharpened instruments of death, to say nothing of being nearly indestructible. The movie's strongest themes are poetically captured in the quieter moments, such as when John ponders the fate of mankind, questioning whether we're destined to destroy ourselves with the tools of our own making.
We're not gonna make it, are we? People, I mean.
Nail-biting, exciting, yet deeper than its action movie peers, T2 makes us question our blind embrace of technology, and for that reason, it deserves an honorary spot in the Cyberpunk Hall of Fame. Video games have come a long way from their simplistic roots in the 1970s and 80s. The rapid development of graphics tech was not only visually appealing, but also allowed the illustration of more nuance to their storytelling. Games used to be so abstract that they leaned on the imagination of the audience for world building and narrative, rather than through the game's audio visuals themselves. Now, they could meet the player halfway. No longer limited to the player's imagination, they now had vivid graphical detail and layered music, long sections of dialogue and text, and even recorded speech in some cases. Because of this innovation, we saw the rise of immersive games with worlds we were able to live in, rather than imagine. And the cyberpunk genre bloomed as a result. Crusader No Remorse and its sequel, Crusader No Regret, tackled the concept of an authoritarian world government. You play as the Silencer, an enhanced super soldier under the employ of the World Economic Consortium. In the 22nd century, after an extended decline of economic and social welfare, the WEC have a stranglehold on the population. The populace is suffocating under taxes of 90% or higher, and any who dare oppose this regime are quickly silenced with deadly force, reflecting the historical accounts of increased government intervention following disasters or depressions. It's not an uncommon trope, but another stern reminder that governments often continue to gain power, but rarely give it up voluntarily. Once you get past the game's cryptic control scheme, which allows for complex movement and 360 degrees of aim, Crusader is an action-packed spectacle of gunning, crouching, rolling, running, and strafing. Building on the Ultima 8 engine, but resembling something more akin to the early Fallout or later XCOM games, its methodical real-time combat is broken up by puzzles and computer logs, like an immersive sim. Often you'll have to read digital notes left behind by office workers to be able to bypass keypads and unlock doors, all the while evading turrets and cameras, and quickly neutralizing targets before they can get their hands on an alarm button. Non-combative targets will surrender or run to the nearest alarm when threatened.
You're not supposed to be here!
While aggressors will shoot at you on sight, adding a sense of realism to the game. You can also rack up collateral damage in an explosive carnival of destruction, whether accidentally or intentionally. Computers, architecture, and electronics go up like fireworks when hit by gunfire, and the rush you feel when pulling off a Hollywood action stunt is enthralling. Once the Silencer learns of the evils of the WEC, he defects to the rebels' side to aid them with their cause. Not the most original turn of events, but Crusader's enjoyable combat and world building serve as a solid shoot-'em-up set in a disquieting future, not too dissimilar from where our current society may lead to. In the Eastern world, the 1990s would treat us to some of the most inspired cyberpunk fiction we've seen to date. Early media like Blade Runner and Neuromancer had a distinct East Asian influence. From the neon kanji signs adorning future Los Angeles, to the ninja assassins and Nuyen currency in the sprawl, the globalization of Asian culture continued to color cyberpunk media. It was an ongoing creative symbiosis. The Western industrialization of the East would in turn influence the West, and it became an ongoing give and take of cultural interpretations. This was amplified by America's growing interest in Japanese animation and comics. One such example is the manga and anime series Battle Angel Alita. Its story focused on the stark contrast between the luxury of upper-class society and the oppression of the lower class, set against the scrapyard, a crumbling wasteland of discarded technology. When a broken cyborg girl is found among the refuse, a cyber physician repairs her and takes her under his wing. When she comes to, she has no memory of her past life, yet she dreams of reaching Zalem, the floating paradise that no one bound to the earth below dare to enter. Battle Angel Alita explores the ongoing struggle between humans and cyborgs. Alita finds herself attracted to action and glory when she discovers her mysteriously impressive fighting skills and becomes a hunter-warrior, turning in bounties as part of the society's mercenarial law enforcement, and some whisper of the possibility to buy your way into Zalem. She later joins the violent gladiatorial sport Motorball, where the toughest cyborgs battle it out to become the champion of the tracks. 5 years after the home video series, a Japanese-only PlayStation game released, which told of Alita's exploits, bounty hunts, and travails, but sadly never reached Western shores. Battle Angel Alita delved into the timeless themes of class struggle and self-discovery, and through its many iterations, quickly became one of the pillars of Japanese cyberpunk. Two years later, the now legendary Ghost in the Shell would change our perception of what Japanese animation could explore in a mature way. The movie's profound themes and exceptional production values crowned the film as the gold standard of cyberpunk anime. Based on the manga series of the same name, Ghost in the Shell follows the cyborg operative Major Kusanagi, who works for the secretive Section 9 in a futuristic depiction of Hong Kong. Here, she performs hit jobs and dangerous missions in order to catch the mysterious Puppet Master, a notorious ghost hacker who is playing God with civilians, city workers, and politicians for some malevolent plan. Ghosts are the name given to human souls in this world, which can be digitized and transplanted from organic to cyborg bodies. The film explores the horrifying concept of hacking minds, wirelessly uploading false memories into victims, turning them into unknowing slaves.
Then I guess you can't understand how a father would feel about his little girl. She's my beautiful, precious angel. See?
All your memories about your wife and daughter are false. They're like a dream. Someone's taken advantage of you. They were trying to make you ghost hack into some government officials.
But that can't be.
I've been to your home. It's a bachelor's apartment. No one's there.
But I already told you, when I separated from my wife.
I checked the records. You've been living there over 10 years. You've never had a wife or kid. They aren't real. They're a simulated experience.
This is the photo you showed to your coworker. Who do you see?
I had a picture of her. She was there.
What's her name? How old is she? Where'd you meet your wife and when did you marry her?
If this is all a lie, what happens? Will I get my old memory back?
The animation team meticulously researched every aspect of the film, such as its realistic portrayal of firearms and physics. Guns cock, disassemble, and reload in lifelike fashion, and bullets properly react to metal and other surfaces. The film bridges the familiar military and computer technology of our own world with a fantasized version of the future. A shootout with an armored hexapedal tank, snipers boarding helicopters with folding wings, and a cat-and-mouse chase using thermoptic camouflage were immortal moments that stood out in our memories for decades. Anime often gets a reputation for being over-the-top, tone-deaf, and hyperbolic. And while that may be true for many works, Ghost in the Shell is extraordinarily cinematic in its editing style and presentation. But between its Hollywood-quality action scenes, it has somber, atmospheric montages to let the viewer soak in the despair and soullessness of this circuit-infected world. The opening music was inspired by a Bulgarian choir, but was written in the ancient Japanese language of Yamato. It's a hauntingly beautiful hymn about a wedding, a lovely bride, and a god. Foreboding, setting the tone for the rest of the story. In a universe where we share our world with cyborgs, there are some truly disturbing moments of synthetic body horror. Writhing muscles, the dead stare of mechanical eyes, and the tearing of cybernetic limbs. Ghost in the Shell explores the philosophy behind the transference of one's ghost from man to machine. If placed in a cyborg body, at what point does your soul become inhuman? Can an AI obtain human rights and the ability to procreate? These are challenges humanity will eventually have to reckon with.
There are countless ingredients that make up the human body and mind, like all the components that make up me as an individual with my own personality. Sure, I have a face and voice to distinguish myself from others, but my thoughts and memories are unique only to me, and I carry a sense of my own destiny. Each of those things are just a small part of it. I collect information to use in my own way. All of that blends to create a mixture that forms me and gives rise to my conscience. I feel confined, only free to expand myself within boundaries.
Confinement, that's why you gamble swimming with a body that can sink like a rock? What the hell is it that you see at the bottom, in that darkness?
What starts out as a straightforward sci-fi action flick with a cyber murderer on the loose delves into cryptic, existential territory by its end. The questions these stories raise are always more interesting than their answers. Ghost in the Shell is seemingly inconclusive by design. Perhaps this is why we couldn't get enough of this universe. The film made less at the box office than its production budget, but due to growing cult popularity, strong home video sales quadrupled those initial numbers. The movie's underground success eventually led to a sequel, multiple TV series runs, video game spin-offs, and an American live-action adaptation over the following decades. The original film was re-released in 2008, featuring a complete sound remaster, with a few scenes reanimated using CGI, a somewhat divisive change that would be reversed in its 4K re-release in 2020. Ghost in the Shell was praised for its mature and nuanced themes, and inspired many future works, both in the East and the West, including major Hollywood releases like The Matrix, James Cameron's Avatar, and Steven Spielberg's AI. Beautiful, layered, often imitated but never quite surpassed, Ghost in the Shell remains one of the most profound animated features ever made. As the genre continued to expand, one of the most popular fantasy RPGs from Japan began to adopt cyberpunk themes. Final Fantasy VII has its entire first act set in the dystopian Midgar, a multi-level city where the high society lives on a structural plate that literally hangs over the slums. At its center, the Shinra power plant drains the life force from the Earth to fuel this electric metropolis, poisoning its surroundings. The company also uses its vast influence and resources for macabre experiments, such as the Soldier program, which creates superhuman clones to fight for their cause. At one point, Shinra sabotages the Sector 7 plate so as to fall and crush the people beneath it as a last-ditch effort to kill suspected terrorists hiding there. A horrifying vision of what a corrupt megacity could be capable of. Final Fantasy VII launched the series into the CD-ROM era, along with its first ever 3D graphics and cinematic cutscenes. It set a darker tone for the series than was previously explored, and remains today the most successful entry the franchise has seen yet, further popularizing cyberpunk as a viable setting. The rate of violent crime in the United States steadily rose from the end of World War II all the way up to 1991. This had multiple, long-standing effects. It darkened the entertainment and media of the time, with a focus on drugs, gangs, and corruption. Law enforcement also became more militarized to combat this dangerous trend. On the other hand, science and technological progress were booming. The Hubble Space Telescope launched in 1990, giving us a clearer visage of the stars than we'd ever witnessed before. Computer and tech corporations like Microsoft rose to the top of their field in a handful of years, and computers had become the fastest-growing industry in the world. The dichotomy of social decline combined with rapid corporate and technological growth was a perfect formula for inspiring cyberpunk media.
Peace, officer. Think it over, creep.
The hotly anticipated sequel to 1987's smashing success, RoboCop 2 lost its visionary writer-director combo, instead taking on comic writer Frank Miller and The Empire Strikes Back director Irvin Kershner. The film returns to Detroit, crumbling under the pressure of crime and corruption, both political and corporate. But unlike the original, the delicate balance of satire and depth seemed to fall flat. Many serious scenes seemed to be undercut by a jab of humor or irreverence.
OCP is proud to present the RoboCop 2.
To its credit, RoboCop 2 has some enjoyable action and some fascinating ideas, such as privatizing the entire city of Detroit under the ownership of a corporation. But many of these never truly pay off. The sequel's new antagonist is a cultish drug kingpin named Kane and his bewildering choice of a second-in-command, a smarmy middle school-aged kid who helps him run his organized drug empire. This may have translated better into comic books, but not so well on the big screen. Despite having over double the budget of the original, RoboCop 2 feels like a parody of one of the best sci-fi movies of the generation. RoboCop 3 continued this trend. It was so poorly received that RoboCop wouldn't return to the silver screen for 20 years. Putting you in the shoes of a cyberpunk law enforcer was the flawed but enjoyable Technocop. Most known for its Sega Genesis port, it's a hybrid of two modes. The first has you driving a souped-up car, with gameplay similar to the Outrun series, chasing down criminals and neutralizing them with guns, or grinding the tires of other vehicles with tricked-out rims. Once you arrive at the scene of a crime, the game switches to a side-scroller. Here, you must wade through slummy dens filled with punks, gangbangers, and squatters, and shoot your way to your suspect, while minimizing innocent casualties, and avoiding an early retirement. The game is soaked in ultraviolence, with enemies exploding into piles of gore on death. This was only possible due to Sega's lax censorship during the 90s, compared to Nintendo's iron grip. Technocop was coldly reviewed at the time. Other than its basic loop of drive, shoot, capture, repeat, there isn't much story or depth beyond that. But it has a few apologists who admire the game's edgy, Knight Rider-esque gameplay and mild police sim mechanics. Continuing the theme of urban corruption and enforcement, one of the most fascinating games by French developer Delphine Software was Flashback. Along with their previous game, Another World, they were two of the most respected cinematic platformers of their day. Flashback starts off with a daring escape from a mysterious facility, which ends with the protagonist, Conrad, getting shot down and crashing into the jungle. He awakens with his memory wiped clean and must make his way to the high-tech city of New Washington to uncover the mystery of his past life. Here, the game becomes a torrent of cyberpunk atmosphere. Corrupt cops with jetpacks, hovering cars, shady clubs, dilapidated slums, and high-tech electronics, set in an off-world city at the center of an insidious plot, devised by shape-shifting aliens called Morphs. One story beat takes you to Death Tower, a televised game show where you must fight for survival to win a ticket back to Earth. All of this makes for an intense and exciting adventure. At its core, Flashback is a platformer with an elegant, if frustratingly precise, execution. You're generally running, climbing, jumping, and navigating the world, screen by screen, similar to Prince of Persia. Pixel-precise leaps, climbs, and actions require split-second timing, else you might fall to your death, or run into a disintegrating energy field. And when you're spotted by an enemy, you must be quick on the draw, as shootouts can go south very quickly. Flashback stands out from other games due to its minimalist but effective sound, music, and visual design. The game uses only a few shades of color to detail complex cityscapes, and it features excellent rotoscoped animations for some of the smoothest and realistic moving characters in 16-bit gaming. Flashback held the Guinness record for best-selling French video game at the time, and is remembered as one of the most elegant and unique platformers ever designed. Three years later, a sequel called Fade to Black rolled out. Here, Conrad is imprisoned by the Morphs and must make his escape. But unlike the urban platformer adventure style of the first game, Fade to Black evolves into more of a space opera action sci-fi game. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does stray from the cyberpunk-themed atmosphere of the original. The game made the jump to a 3D, third-person perspective, but was limited by 1995 technology. Gone are the smoothly rotoscoped animations, precise movement, and platforming, replaced with a much stiffer experience with unintuitive controls. Compared to the fast-paced, ducking, rolling, and pistol-whipping action of the original, it may have been too early for the Flashback series to make such a leap. Though it was well received and sold 500,000 copies, Fade to Black didn't earn the instant classic status that Flashback did. Another story of self-discovery in a cyberpunk world you do not know was told in the underrated 1992 film Freejack, loosely based on the novel Immortality Incorporated by Robert Sheckley. Its main character, Alex, is a man out of time. During a tense Formula One race, he is suddenly transported as he is about to suffer a deadly crash, and is sent 18 years into the future. 2, 1. Alex escapes his captors in a moment of panic, and is now being hunted down as a Freejack, someone who shouldn't exist in this timeline, and is considered less than human under the law. He tries to find some connection to his previous life, while on the run from the nefarious Bonejackers who brought him here. Who is behind his kidnapping? Why is this world so unfamiliar? How has he become a wanted man? The answers to his questions slowly unfurl during the twists and turns that hint at a dark scheme surrounding his fiancée from the past.
I don't want an alternative body. I want this one.
Freejack occasionally hints at an intriguing cyberpunk world beyond the events of the film, with the luxurious high-rises of New York City contrasted with decrepit slums filled with lowlives and backstabbing scum. The most interesting concept the movie explores is the transferal of consciousness from one body to another, and the inevitability of those in power to use this technology to achieve the one luxury money can't buy: to live forever. With a milquetoast reception and measly box office results, this flawed adventure, which hinted at profound ideas, would be soon forgotten. The decade saw the rise of an exciting subgenre of video games, where fantasy, magic, and monsters clash with the dismal streets of cyberpunk. Some of these titles struggled with the dichotomy of circuits and magic, while others explored what cultural effects would transpire from these seemingly antithetical themes. Cybermage: Darklight Awakening is one such game. It got lost in the stampede of Doom clones after id Software's flagship game conquered the first-person shooter genre, but Cybermage stands out from the pack due to its unique dark future cityscapes mixed with magic and mystery. Strife further evolved this formula. Set in an apocalyptic future after a comet impact destroyed society as we knew it, now the oppressed masses are ruled by the Order, a cybernetically enhanced faction under the influence of a mysterious, mind-controlling entity. Like Cybermage, Strife borrows the run-and-gun gameplay of Doom, but adds elements common in role-playing games. Strife features hub-world zones with shops, interconnected level design, guards, and a law enforcement system. Despite its use of the Doom engine, which was already dated at the time, the game broke ground that future classics such as Deus Ex would further pioneer. Strife introduced fully voiced, non-player characters you can talk to, with multiple dialogue options and branching story paths. This was groundbreaking stuff for 1996. Seemingly pulled straight from the splatbooks of a traditional role-playing game, BloodNet is an original fusion of cyberware, megacorps, future tech, and vampires of all things. You play as a recently converted bloodsucker, whose transition is slowed by a previously installed cyberware head implant.
My vampires and I have tracked dozens of former TransTech employees. At last we found you. For your services to me, I give you life eternal, undeath without end.
In a dire quest for a cure and revenge against your maker, none other than Van Helsing himself, you will gun down thugs, holy warriors, and company men, and jack into the abstract worlds of cyberspace. And it gets weirder from there. At one point, you can log into cyberspace to meet with a computer virus who looks like a dragon, but talks like Elvis Presley. You can later download him into an android body to fight your battles along with you.
You gotta be the king himself.
That I am. Elvis lives in the net. I'm just a man on a mission for information freedom, baby.
Part adventure game, part tactical RPG, part vampire life simulator. BloodNet is a beatnik experience, bartering with alleyway dealers for cyberware, guns, and armor, investigating the vampire threat, and feeding on the living to survive. If your main character is blood deprived for too long, he will go berserk and mindlessly feed on your companions, killing them outright and potentially alienating others in your party. This muddled mess of vamps and hackers is elevated by the game's inspired technobabble, featuring much of the traditional cyberpunk canon, such as decking, cyberspace, intrusion countermeasures electronics, also known as ICE, and the like.
Only people who can afford a deck jockey get access that everyone deserves.
Not like I haven't melted ice before.
If you're gonna do it, try it with a little vasopressin or Siloblossom in you. It gives you a more seamless mind-C-space interface.
The game was plagued by technical and creative issues, such as being able to walk through some walls, poorly proportioned backgrounds, zany voice acting, and confounding combat and difficulty spikes that lead to abrupt deaths. For those with the patience to see it through, BloodNet offers an imperfect experience unlike anything else, embracing themes that cyberpunk often treads on. As tabletop RPGs released new editions in the early 90s, books such as Cyberpunk 2020, GURPS Cyberpunk, and Shadowrun 2nd Edition flew off the shelves and introduced a newer, younger audience to the concepts of cyberspace, Deckers, and Megacorps. The Cyberpunk meets Tolkien RPG, Shadowrun, was the frontrunner of this genre and licensed multiple games for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and Sega CD. The first Shadowrun video game was released for the SNES in 1993. Like a good film noir, the story opens with a mystery. You awaken in a morgue, much to the horror of the morticians who just stored you there. You get to explore the harsh, urban landscape of Seattle in the year 2050, where orc thugs will gun you down on the streets, and even opening the wrong apartment door could end with a gut full of lead. Street samurai, hitmen, and corporate mages can be your friends or foes, depending on whose payroll they're on. Grappling with dangerous powers that be and a nasty case of amnesia, you are on a quest to find out about your past self and to solve the mystery of who put you 6 feet under and why. Not featuring a traditional fantasy hero on a quest to save the world, Shadowrun stood out from the crowd with a morally gray tale of mystery, revenge, and detective work. The game's storyline was based on Never Deal with a Dragon, the first Shadowrun novel ever published, but makes some deviations here and there to make the plot come into its own. Shadowrun had an unusual control scheme, where you move around with the D-pad, but aim your weapons with an on-screen cursor. Unlike the PC, the Super Nintendo wasn't the optimum platform for these controls. Like the tabletop RPG it was based on, Shadowrun embraces both the fantastic Dungeons & Dragons elements like elves, monsters, magic, and prophecy, as well as established cyberpunk themes, crime-filled streets, cybernetics, corporate warfare, and urban grit. A likely nod to Neuromancer and Split Second, you play Jake Armitage, a gunman and a hacker who later becomes a jack of all trades when he rediscovers that he is a shaman who can cast powerful magical spells. This gives the player a sampler of all builds available in Shadowrun, rather than following the class-based restrictions in the sourcebooks. The game oozes atmosphere, from shantytown slums, graveyards filled with the undead, and skyscrapers guarded by mercenaries. This is aided by the memorable and eclectic soundtrack by Marshall Parker, featuring moody electronica while wandering the streets and hallways, lively punk rock during concerts, and upbeat techno action while guns are blazing. A true cyberpunk game would be incomplete without decking. In this iteration of the game, decking is a fun but simplistic affair. Entering the Matrix places Armitage into a digital grid, where he has to avoid ice and extract data before jacking out. An on-screen console warns you how many ice threats are adjacent to you, and you must memorize and predict patterns to get to your goal. An interesting diversion, but it essentially boiled down to a round of Minesweeper, with some thematic flair. Another departure from the common RPG tropes is the way you gain companions. Instead of recruiting loyal followers who stay with you through thick and thin, Shadowrunners are mercenaries who require upfront payment and only stick around for a specified amount of time. These temporary alliances solidify the cutthroat, money-hungry world of Shadowrun, as compared to the valiant troop of heroes touted by mainstream games. Shadowrun for the SNES was an underground hit and only grew in cult popularity as the years went on. Though not as well known and accessible as the Final Fantasy-style games of its time, its intriguing and punishing world was a breath of fresh air to the hardcore RPG audience who played it, and it remains a favorite in the hearts of many cyberpunk gamers. Released a year later, Shadowrun on the Sega Genesis was a drastically different take on the same setting. Developed by a completely different studio, unrelated to the previous game, Shadowrun 1994 sold less than its Super Nintendo counterpart. This is a shame because the Genesis adaptation is more of an open-ended Shadowrunner simulator, rather than a linear RPG. You take on the role of Joshua, who spends his last New Yen to travel to Seattle. He's on a personal mission to find out who killed his brother. Leads are slim, and in order to build up a crew with enough resources to succeed, he needs to take on Shadowruns to make ends meet. Unlike the SNES game, you have the choice of being a decker, a street samurai, or a shaman during character creation. rather than being a hybrid of all three. Similarly, in both versions, you acquire karma to increase various stats. Karma is earned by completing runs, killing enough enemies, or advancing the plot. Unique to the Genesis game, an infinite amount of runs are randomly generated. You can meet with various Mr. Johnsons to do the corporation's dirty work. In gameplay terms, this results in a wide variety of replayable missions, such as raiding gang hangouts, hitting megacorp buildings, extractions, courier missions, ghoul hunting, or decking into the Matrix. The first few hours of the game are a brutally punishing slog. You'll be slammed with insurmountable odds, underfunded, undergunned, and outnumbered, until you get a decent weapon and hire some help. The Genesis game has a much more fleshed out decking minigame compared to the SNES version, and features a visually impressive portrayal of the Matrix. You can scan nodes to identify them, then you can tactically use pre-installed programs to break in. You can launch digital attacks at computer chips, dismantle ICE defenses, and use advanced technological abilities to delve deep into corporate mainframes. The game attempts to be a cyberpunk sandbox, where your working runs like it was your job, living paycheck to paycheck. Conversely, the SNES version had a stricter narrative through line, with a more linear plot and a finite number of quests. The Genesis version, on the other hand, has 3 major segments to the game, which you can tackle in any order, in the vein of games like Mega Man or Alpha Protocol. There's a real sense of logistics here, right down to setting money aside for paying the salaries of other Shadowrunners you hired, gearing them up, and even managing ammo and medical supplies. For the tougher missions, it almost feels like planning a heist. Like in the SNES version, you can hire Shadowrunners temporarily, but unique to this one, you can opt to pay them 10 times their fee to hire them permanently. The mundane business aspects make the experience more engrossing. Lost resources and companions have real consequences and make your quest for vengeance that much more difficult. After magic is suddenly introduced to our modern world, and various races of metahumans like elves, dwarves, and orcs appear, future Seattle is scarred by decades of corporate and metaracial conflict. You're never safe, as randomized encounters will crop up in the streets and districts, and even during corporate infiltration missions. A stranger could approach you asking for help tracking down a fleeing civilian. A corporate mage could stop you and ask for ID if you're snooping around their offices. Or a Lone Star patrolman could shake you down and arrest you if you're carrying contraband. These moments keep you on your toes and make even traditionally safe locations in RPGs, such as city streets, into sort of a dangerous overworld, where you've got to keep a finger on your trigger at all times to stay alive. Combat is more up close and visceral than the SNES game. Guns, claws, and powerful magic go flying in a fast-paced frenzy. Both games have an arsenal of weaponry and optional cyberware upgrades, but Shadowrun for the Genesis has a surprising amount of customization options. You can add sights, clips, and modifications to pistols, shotguns, and machine guns, install smart gun technology, or even upgrade the memory capacity of and install software for a Decker's best friend, their Cyberdeck. Both the 93 and 94 versions of Shadowrun are excellent additions to anyone's cyberpunk collection. And considering the technical limitations of their respective platforms, they earmarked the potential for what interactive media could bring to the genre. Two years later, a graphical text adventure based in the Shadowrun universe was released for the Sega CD. It sported a rich anime aesthetic and occasional Final Fantasy-esque party combat. Sadly, it was only released in Japan and was never localized to English-speaking countries. It remains quite obscure today. In a distinctive mixture of psychological fantasy and cyberpunk, Dreamweb is a somber, top-down adventure game with strong inspirations from Blade Runner and the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Here, you take on the dismal life of Ryan, a bartender who is having a rough time at the game of life. He's about to lose his job, and his relationship with his girlfriend is strained due to his disturbing dreams, where he screams himself awake in feverish sweats. These dreams are of an ancient, extra-dimensional world with hooded figures telling him of a grim prophecy. that he must kill the Seven, influential individuals who will shift the balance of the universe toward evil, and these visions are so vivid that he suspects them to be real. Throughout the story, you explore a small part of what seems like a grander, seedy universe, committing gruesome tasks under the premise that you're saving the world. Are you the deliverer of mankind, or are you a broken man whose last throes of insanity lead to cold, bloody murder? Dreamweb's atmosphere, striking graphic style, and its incredible ambient soundtrack are what make it so memorable. A depressing industrial metropolis, lit by a dying amber sky. Throughout his investigation into these Seven, Ryan can use various network cards and terminals to hack into computers using a specific syntax and typed commands. This gives the impression of surfing the internet in another world, and adds a strong sense of cyberpunk flavor to the game. Ryan's dark adventure sees him visit seedy clubs, TV studios, pop star hotel rooms, and unkempt apartments, as part of a greater plan by these otherworldly beings. In addition to typical adventure game puzzles, there are occasional action scenes, which require you to use items in rapid fashion, else you meet a quick demise. The game's puzzles can delve a bit into frustrating moon logic, as the genre often did, but the game's compelling, pitch-black tone and atmosphere is unlike any other. The final act of the game does take a sharp downturn in its pacing and tone, and the ending is a severe gut punch, which divided players and critics at the time. Nevertheless, Dreamweb is another cyberpunk classic any aficionado would be remiss not to experience. In just 40 years, the global population had doubled from 2.5 to 5 billion people. So it was no wonder that the 1990s were obsessed with overpopulation, rising inner-city conflict, arcologies, and megacities. The slow asphyxiation of the Earth by unchecked expansion seemed to be inevitable, and in turn, sci-fi games and movies would often examine the human problem.
Strange how paranoia can link up with reality now and then.
In an original take on cyberpunk, Quarantine puts you in the shoes of a taxi driver trying to make ends meet in a violent urban wasteland. Customers will hail you down, and once you pick them up, you'll have to navigate a maze of streets and alleys to get them to their destination within their time limit. After you've earned enough fares, you can trick out your cab with an arsenal of weapons and defenses, like saw blades, miniguns, rockets, and plated armor. Rioters and attackers lay in wait for your unsuspecting cab to pass by. They'll lob Molotovs and bullets at you when you least expect it. Quarantine has some Death Race and Mad Max in its blood, and plays like a mix of Twisted Metal, Crazy Taxi, and Carmageddon, but predates all of these games. It's actually a clever Doom clone under the surface, with acceleration and deceleration added to simulate the inertia of driving a car. Specialized missions crop up from time to time, with objectives such as assassinations or sabotaging buildings. After enough criteria are met, you can take to the underground tunnels to move on to a new level. It's an explosive, frantic, and exciting experience. And though light on storyline, the ugly, violent, working man atmosphere is fun to soak in. Quarantine remains obscure today, but goes to show how many different angles we could approach this type of setting from.
Please, put down your weapon.
In 1993, Bullfrog Productions entered the fray with Syndicate, a drastic departure from their previous work in business simulators and god games. In the most violent form of hostile takeover you could imagine, Syndicate puts you in the shoes of a corporate executive vying for global dominance, managing business and directing cyborg agents who traverse a world ruled by corporatocracy. But instead of squabbling over stock prices and trade deals, they take their fight to the streets, gunning down their competition in all-out urban warfare. A prominent syndicate, Eurocorp, invented the chip, a mind-altering device eventually implanted into the neck of every member of society. It completely reshapes their perception of the world around them, from the dark metropolis of the real world into an idyllic utopia. In a world which is now developing augmented reality glasses and Neuralink brain chips, Syndicate now rings truer than it has any right to. In the game, you must carry out brutal missions that span the globe, but you have many methods at your disposal. You can run and gun, blowing away your competition, police officers, and bystanders at will, or you can try to sneak in and only dispatch high-value targets. A vital tool of domination is the Persuadertron, a device that directly hacks the electronics in people's brainstems, converting them to your cause. You can amass a veritable army of followers, but must have enough influence with lower-level civilians before being able to convert tougher targets. Eventually, you can persuade police officers and even enemy agents to your side, and they will fight and die alongside you. Missions are a variety of brute force hit jobs, assassinations of specific targets, rescue ops, and abductions. In between field work, there are business concerns to worry about, such as juggling finances, buying cybernetic upgrades and guns for your agents, or planning and funding research into more advanced weaponry and tech. Once you've taken control of a city, you gain additional funds over time through taxes, but the delicate balance between bankruptcy and overtaxation can lead to revolts, requiring you to take that territory back before profits return. Unlike most games with the click-to-move control scheme, Syndicate allows you to exert direct control over your agents. Holding down the action button immediately causes your agents to fire rather than directing autonomous AI troops. Another unique aspect of Syndicate is that it plants you in the role of one of the worst people in the world, who would do anything or kill anyone to raise their bottom line, unlike your typical hero. It's deliciously dark and unapologetic, letting you delve into a dystopian fantasy and be as depraved as you want to be. A strange amalgamation of business sim, strategy, RPG, and top-down action, Syndicate is both a marvel of early 90s video game design, but is also a perfect example of the type of cyberpunk themes you can explore in video games. Its business mechanics emulate the struggle of corporations, where a couple bad investments or overspending can lead to a quick bankruptcy, and a blissfully unaware populace living an electronic illusion, completely blind to the corporate corruption and violence around them, is just about as cyberpunk as you can get. 3 years later, a new team at Bullfrog would form to develop a sequel. Syndicate Wars took the flat 2D presentation of the first game and thrust it into a true 3D world. The atmosphere and spectacle is much more vibrant due to the boost in graphics tech. Pouring rain and the glow of neon signs paint the cityscapes in iconic cyberpunk glory, but a few of the interesting aspects of the original were lost in the transition. We see the return of Eurocorp as the premier syndicate of the world, but it's now faced with an ominous threat: the Church of the New Epoch. Their zealous followers are attempting to overthrow Eurocorp's stranglehold on the world by disrupting the illusion broadcasted into people's minds. The Church's end goal is to harness the power of newly discovered alien technology and flee to their moon base while they extinguish all life on Earth. This is quite a step up from the stakes of the original. As opposed to a greed-driven corporate war, it is now more of a fight between the oppressive order of Eurocorp and the chaotic evil of the Church. The territorial control system from the original game was discarded. Now missions give a one-time bonus of cash you can allocate to research, equipment, and guns, rather than periodic taxation like in the original. This simplifies money management, but also dispels the illusion of actually running a corporation. The muddled intelligence, perception, adrenaline system was also removed to streamline the experience. The guns-blazing action returns from the first game, but with more destruction and chaos than before. You can place bombs to demolish entire buildings, call in nuclear strikes from orbital satellites, and cause mass destruction with outlandish weaponry toward the end of the game. Syndicate Wars takes the miniature city simulator aspect of Syndicate to a whole new level. Like in the original, you can get into vehicles and drive through the city streets. Cars, personnel carriers, and trucks obey traffic laws, stop at crosswalks, and park in designated spaces. Each new area feels like a living, breathing cityscape, filled with pedestrians crossing the streets, gang members roaming the parks, police officers ordering people to keep moving, and a steady flow of traffic. A beautiful cyberpunk ant farm you can bring to domination, destruction, or salvation. The game owes a lot from its Blade Runner inspirations, with flying cars, dark city streets, and video billboards. A few nods to influential cyberpunk media such as 2000 AD and Ghost in the Shell appear in these ads as well. Though perhaps not as groundbreaking as the original, Syndicate Wars is a stellar entry to action strategy and cyberpunk games alike. Its moody atmosphere and soundtrack, combined with sandbox gameplay, simulates a vibrant metropolis crushed under the boot of Megacorps better than nearly any other game. The US population grew faster from 1990 to 2000 than any other previous decade in American history. This likely inspired visions of a massively overpopulated future, with giant megacities sprawling the world over. Two films came out in short order, tackling the travails of urban society in two distinct tones. Both starred the same lead actor, and oddly enough, the same comic sidekick. In a way, these movies are almost mirror images of each other. Demolition Man is set during a seemingly utopian future, where murder, sex, and even swearing are bygone vices. When a hardened killer and a tough guy cop from the past are brought out of cryostasis, the future citizens of LA are in culture shock at the crude, brute force suddenly smashed into their society.
MDK, murder, death, kill, murder, death, kill, murder, death, kill. Last recorded offense, September 25th, 2010.
Killing has become such a forgotten concept by now, the modern police don't even understand MDK, the official abbreviation for murder, death, kill, that paints the rap sheet of the movie's villain. Sylvester Stallone's character is a no-nonsense cop on the hunt for his arch-enemy, played by Wesley Snipes. Easily overpowering the helpless police of the future, Snipes swiftly plunges the city into havoc and chaos, with the help of his recently thawed felon thugs. The cyberpunk angle of the film comes into play when you find out that the show of violence and force was actually staged by the powers that be. This was a scare tactic to ensure their authoritarian reign goes unchecked. But things quickly spiral out of control. An insurgent colony living underground dream of the day they can overthrow the status quo. This highlights how nonconformists of an idealized society would live in poverty and ruin.
We're police officers. We're not trained to handle this kind of violence.
Demolition Man is a fun but deceivingly formulaic 90s action flick. But similar to its forebears like RoboCop, it's fiercely satirical of the growing trends of Western culture. Political correctness, over-censorship, safe spaces, and protecting the populace from crude language and behavior are portrayed to an extreme here. Radio stations play only advertising jingles, swearing is ticketed and fined, and virtual lovemaking has substituted the real thing.
According to Cocteau's plan, I'm the enemy. Because I like to think. I like to read. I'm into freedom of speech and freedom of choice. I've seen the future. You know what it is? It's a 47-year-old virgin sitting around in his beige pajamas, drinking a banana broccoli shake, singing I'm an Oscar Mayer wiener.
The argument of an authoritarian peace versus a tumultuous but free society is the major conflict of the movie, and its message resonates even stronger today. As a dark reflection of that film, Judge Dredd tackles a civilization bursting at the seams in lawlessness, corruption, and merciless policing. Based on the comic series of the same name, the spin-off of 2000 AD, the world is in turmoil. Past the desolate waste that blankets most of America, the few giant megacities are now the only pillars of society left, becoming self-governing nations. Working his precinct in Megacity 1, the region formerly composed of New York and most of the Atlantic coast, Dredd is a judge. the future of law enforcement. Judges are an amalgamation of the police officer, judge, jury, and executioner.
Mega City Municipal Code 213, willful destruction of property, that's 2 years. Code 310, illegal possession of assault weapons, 5 years. Code 457, resisting arrest, 20 years. And Code 3613, the first-degree murder of a street judge. Let me guess, life.
In this violent world, a judge has the legal right to sentence anyone on the spot for their crimes, and wield lawgivers, versatile guns rigged to explode when used by unauthorized personnel. In a bedlam of crime and chaos, judges are the swift and effective tool needed in this society, neutralizing anything from terrorists to parking violators. Even the judges themselves have a horrible fate to look forward to. Upon retirement, it is customary that each judge leaves their megacity to go on the long walk, bringing law to the lawless for the rest of their days. Like the comic series, Judge Dredd ponders the horrors of overpopulation and the scalability of society. What does our future hold when our systems buckle under the pressure of billions? Like Demolition Man before it, Stallone plays a hard-boiled and lethal officer. But even the most brutally righteous judge has to answer to the almighty law. After a reporter critical of him is found dead, Dredd is charged with murder. Irrefutable evidence is used to seal his fate, which includes video footage and a bullet imprinted with his own DNA, as all lawgiver bullets are. His prison sentence goes from bad to worse when his trip to the penal colony is shot down by a wasteland cannibal gang. Dredd fights for his life with the help of a retired judge, after which he learns the secret behind his framing and makes his way through the wastes back to Mega City 1. Dredd is now on a mission to take down the man responsible for framing him and to stop this mysterious villain from systematically killing judges in order to dismantle the city's authority from within. As is typical with these kinds of adaptations, Judge Dredd Hollywoodized its source material with all of your usual suspects: a love interest, comic relief, villainous monologues, and a predictable 3-act resolution. It doesn't tap into the beatnik storytelling of the comics, but has some impinging moments of its own, like a fight with a cyborg mutant in the wasteland, recycled food dispensers, and the vivid realization of Mega City 1. Fans of the comics criticize the movie for its loose portrayal of Dredd, who never takes off his helmet in the books, whereas Stallone gets a lot of face time on the screen.
The law!
It's not the most profound cyberpunk film ever made, but it was an admirable attempt at adapting the character, despite its glaze of 90s cheese. The decade saw a resurgence of interest in PKD's works and adaptations, from the blockbuster Total Recall to the 1992 home video release of Blade Runner: The Director's Cut. This new version of the film elevated it from a flawed but underrated gem to an absolute masterclass cult classic, and opened the doors to giving these spectacular worlds another chance. This opportunity was seized by two projects: a video game based on Blade Runner, and a Canadian TV series which hybridized the Blade Runner and Total Recall universes. Blade Runner 1997 was helmed by Westwood Studios co-founder Lewis Castle, who oversaw every aspect of its design, from art direction to programming. Unlike many licensed video games, Blade Runner doesn't pay lip service to its inspirations. It worships its source material. This was arguably the most ambitious and expensive adventure game ever developed. Due to legal entanglements with various owners and production companies, everything in the game had to be made from scratch, using absolutely nothing from the original movie's production. Painstaking detail was put into recreating the 1982 film into a digital environment you could explore and interact with. From the leaky hallways of the Bradbury Building to the noodle shops of Chinatown, from the downtown police station to the Voight-Kampff machine, every audiovisual aspect of the game feels genuine and true to its roots. Frank Lepacki, best known for his work on Command & Conquer, scored the game by ear, perfectly emulating the style of Vangelis, the film's composer. Nothing was out of reach, and the studio even hired the original actors of Tyrell, Rachel, and several other characters from the film to reprise their roles in the game. The story parallels the events of the film. Another set of Nexus 6 replicants are on the loose, and you play rookie Blade Runner named McCoy, tasked with hunting them down and retiring them. You may even cross paths with Deckard, Gaff, and other familiar characters during your investigations. Like a good noir, Blade Runner has many red herrings, twists and turns to keep you guessing until the end.
We're not here to buy, little man. We've come to sell.
You can't possibly have anything to interest me. These are extremely rare animals of the highest quality.
What a coincidence. So am I.
Your case begins when you get a late-night call about a shooting at an animal store. Replicants are suspected to be the perpetrators, as more brutal, human killings ensue. Blade Runner 1997 delves deeper into the lore than the movie at times. You get to see the opposition to the LAPD's take on replicants. Human activists are fighting for replicant rights, and morality is even more blurred when people you trust may not even be human. There are times when your own identity is questioned, borrowing scenes from PKD's novel that were unused in the movie adaptation.
You wake up one day and find it's all been a dream, or you wake up and discover you've been asleep all the time and the nightmare is real. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know who I was, a cop dangling on the short end of the stick, or a rep whose memory banks had run out.
There's also a brilliant randomization system, where the true identity of several characters changes with each playthrough. So when it comes time to perform a Voight-Kampff test, you'll never quite know who is a human and who is a replicant. This stinging doubt wears heavy on the player's mind, perfectly simulating the struggles of being a Blade Runner. Fast travel sees you take flight in your spinner, soaring through Los Angeles to various destinations. There are also occasional combat sequences where you can put your blaster to good use and carefully neutralize enemies while avoiding unarmed civilians.
Reaction time is a factor in this, so please pay attention. Where do you live?
I don't see why you need to know that.
You return from work to find that your home has been burglarized.
The burglar would be very disappointed.
When you've captured a perp, you must carefully conduct your questioning during a VK test to confirm whether they're human or a replicant. Softball questions won't reveal much, but badgering them with hard interrogation will cause them to leave in frustration. There is a myriad of evidence to collect, some optional, that move the investigation forward. Photographs can be loaded into the Esper to enhance, pan, and locate clues. This is exciting and quite evocative of the film, but can also lead to pixel hunting, as many adventure games do. Blade Runner eschews many adventure game stumbling blocks in order to streamline the cinematic storytelling experience. For example, you never need to specifically activate items on people or objects. You can also skip dialogue choices and opt into one of the optional moods, which tailors dialogue for you, and each story act can be completed in different ways.
Zubin was the first Nexus 6 I'd come up against. There was something in his eyes, an almost primordial desire to live. Most of the 3s, 4s, and 5s I'd seen would just give up when you had them, but these 6s, they were a whole other breed.
Graphics tech was still experimental in 1997. The characters in the game weren't polygonal or two-dimensional. They were in fact a series of layers, stacked on top of one another. These are recomposited in real time as a facsimile of a 3D model, similar to the way 3D printing works. It gives the game a unique, impressionistic look and feel, like no other game out there. In spite of technical limitations, the devs harnessed every joule of power they could to bring a cinematic experience to the computer screen, with all the atmosphere, dialogue, and production values therein. A lofty goal during the adolescence of PC gaming. Like the movie it was based on, the game received middling to positive reviews at its release. But since then, Blade Runner has become a treasured cult classic adventure game, unmatched in its reverence for its source material. Over the decades, the game has been recoded, remade, and re-released by fans and developers alike, immortalizing this cyberpunk classic.
I guess that's the story of life. What you most fear never happens, but what you most yearn for never happens either. This is the difference between life and fiction. I suppose it's a good trade-off, but I'm not sure.
Two years later, Total Recall 2070 premiered. An ambitious, short-lived cyberpunk series soaked in the saxophone-kissed glow of 90s television. What made this show stand out was that it wasn't set on a spaceship or fantastical setting like Star Trek or Babylon 5. This was a sci-fi detective series set among the neon lights and rainy streets of crime and corruption. It borrows elements from Total Recall and the short story that inspired it, but in actuality, the series was more of an expansion of the Blade Runner universe. Unofficially, of course. Only this time, with off-world trips to Mars and recall memory implants added into the mix. Here we see androids filled with viscous white fluid, instead of the red-blooded replicants of Blade Runner. The crew built impressive sets in a studio converted from a Toronto military base, which was closed after the Cold War, and the show used state-of-the-art practical effects, as well as cutting-edge technology such as motion-programmed cameras. This allowed them to synchronize computer imagery with live-action footage, such as compositing people walking down a street with CGI cityscapes, or merging a real-life actor with an android prop. Total Recall 2070 had to stretch its budget over 22 episodes, and so couldn't hope to match the production values of Hollywood films. Its two-part pilot episode originally aired as a made-for-TV movie called Machine Dreams, following the story of a modified android coming to grips with sentience and mortality. Michael Easton took on the role of Detective David Hume. He's a straight-edged cop, but doesn't let red tape hold him back from avenging his partner, who was brutally murdered by rogue androids. Easton once explained that he played the part like he was in a regular cop show like NYPD Blue, that just so happens to be set in the future. This was a more grounded outlook that made the series feel more realistic than its contemporaries.
I admire your loyalty. The instinct to avenge a partner's death is something you don't see anymore.
Yeah, I can see how that would get lost when you live your life under a surveillance camera.
You're not suggesting the attempts to make this a safer, more perfect world have actually resulted in loss of individual freedom, are you? I don't believe these events are random occurrences. And I don't believe Mr. Collector is telling us everything he knows.
To his dismay, Hume is assigned a new partner. Detective Favre seems like the brainy, awkward type, but Hume soon discovers a secret few know about. Favre is actually an Alpha, an advanced biological android, the prodigy of some mysterious creator. The detectives stumble upon a conspiracy involving Recall, the company known for their subliminators, memory implanting machines. Powerful individuals are attempting to expand the memory banks of androids with an experimental new consciousness, granting them self-awareness and free will. In this world, androids are subservient and never question their role as menial support for their masters. But now a few androids are running away from their assigned tasks, kidnapping, murdering, and evading law enforcement to some mysterious end. Total Recall 2070 comes into its own about a third of the way through the series, and its plot setups start to pay off toward the end of the season, though the struggle for Hume to come to grips with an android partner after his personal history with them isn't entirely unique. Here, it's treated with a bit more nuance than you'd expect for a Sci-Friday procedural.
Well, looks like I just gave you something to hang me with.
I'm glad you brought it along, Detective Hume. You saved my buttocks.
Don't go getting all emotional on me.
The show quickly becomes a sampler plate of future city plotlines, from VR adult actors to knockoff recall implants, from genetic experimentation to telepathic children. One of the most interesting side plots involves an unseen society of powerful people recruiting cops through cyberspace as agents in some conspiratorial plan. This is in defiance of the computerized justice system, which automatically brain scans witnesses and documents their testimony in full VR playback. At one point, Recall is suspected to be behind secret brain implants that could be activated at a moment's notice, effectively turning its clients into sleeper agents. An inevitable war between androids led by a sentient AI and humans is hinted at, and a greater universe is gradually built up and teased as the show progresses. There are several fictional megacorps that play roles in the cases Hume and Favre take on, and the Citizens Protection Bureau is constantly tied up in red tape, whether it's the mysterious motives of the assessor's office or the will of the consortium. There was a lot of thought put into the show's world building, crafting a fertile universe that could have spawned several seasons.
We reverse engineered from where we wanted to be a series of assumptions that we had in place. El Nino came one year and it never left, and populations changed and began to migrate and moved into the cities from the countryside. When that happened, governments changed because they had to adjust. Gradually, what we arrived at were fantastic 200-story cities of the future.
Sadly, the show's production was too chaotic and expensive to continue. It had to perform a delicate juggling act between multiple production companies, adhere to the standards of both Canadian and American TV stations, and the show's mediocre ratings failed to convince executives to give the second season the green light. Show creator Art Montarastelli claimed that they were starting to garner a dedicated audience by the end of the season, but it was too late to save it. A sad fate for a show with so much potential, but a sign that perhaps it was too ahead of its time. Total Recall 2070 remains an obscure but surprisingly refreshing delve into a case of the week cyberpunk setting that few other series have attempted. These works, some flawed, many of them inspired, would delve into the hardware, morality, and struggle of a corporocratic futuristic world. But the latter half of the decade would evolve, focusing more on the mundane, real side of computers and technology, and the possibilities the future could hold for them. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll explore the broader influence and cultural impact that cyberpunk had during this decade, and the evolution of cyberpunk. And thank you for watching.